The Sahara was a desert of sand, but it once held vast inland seas. It wasn't always this barren expanse. Just a few thousand years ago, it was green. Rivers were there, grasslands, colossal lakes, now vanished. A paleoclimatologist said the Sahara holds a memory of a world we lost, and we can recover that memory. You'll see deserts in a new light by the end. Understand the deep cycles, the cycles that rewrite continents. Satellite images show it. They reveal ancient shorelines. Shorelines buried now under the dunes, and there were cultures, sophisticated cultures that thrived beside these lakes, and when the waters faded, myths were born. This is an epic tale, climate, life, human resilience, written in stone and dust. The change started quietly. It was a small shift in the sky. Earth's path around the sun isn't a perfect circle, and the planet's tilt wobbles over time. These are slow cycles taking tens of thousands of years. They change how the sun's light falls. About 11,000 years ago, the orbit brought the northern hemisphere a bit closer to the sun in summer. Just a bit closer, but that was enough. It amplified the heat engine over North Africa that pulled the monsoon rains. It pulled them hundreds of miles farther inland than they go now. This was the African Humid Period. It lasted nearly 6,000 years. The desert we know, it wasn't there, not like it is now. It wasn't a desert getting some rain. It was a different biome altogether, a different world parked where the Sahara is. Today, satellites can see the outlines, ancient river channels under the sand. Like veins showing where water used to flow, and scientists they pull up cores, long tubes of mud from the Atlantic floor off Africa's coast. In that deep sea mud, there's a record. Mixed in with the ocean silt, there's pollen, tiny grains, wind-blown pollen from a green continent, pollen from grasses, from acacia trees, evidence of a savanna. A savanna that's been gone for thousands of years. That's how we know the calendar is written in the stone and the silt, a direct record of grass and water. That lush, stable place that was the essential foundation. The stage was set, and then the main characters could arrive. Those characters weren't just animals or early people, though they would come. The first players, the most monumental ones, were the lakes. That stable green stage needed a central character, and it arrived in a form that's almost beyond comprehension. Lake Megachad, it wasn't just a lake, it was an inland sea, a body of fresh water so vast it could swallow several modern countries. At its peak, this single lake covered an area larger than the Caspian Sea does today. Over 400,000 square kilometers, an expanse so huge it would dominate the entire center of North Africa. Its ghost is still written on the landscape. From space, satellites with radar can see the faint concentric rings etched into the earth. Ancient shorelines on the ground, those same lines are subtle, grass-covered ridges. The last topographical memory of where water met land. This was a hydrological titan, fed by a network of mighty rivers flowing down from mountain ranges we still know. The Tibesti, the Ennedi, but in a wetter time, these rivers would have been torrents carrying water from highlands hundreds of miles away to fill this colossal basin. And the lake wasn't a static, placid pool. It breathed. Its levels rose and fell with the seasons over longer climate cycles, sometimes shrinking, sometimes expanding to an even more staggering size. It had depth, it had currents, and it had life on a scale that rivals the great African ecosystems today. Within and around this freshwater sea thrived an astonishing world. The lake itself held massive populations of fish. We know from layers of fossilized bones in the dry lakebed sediments, crocodiles and hippopotamuses lived on its shores. In its waterways, but the lake's influence reached beyond its own banks. The moisture it released fed the surrounding savannas, creating lush grasslands. Grasslands that supported herds we associate with sub-Saharan Africa today: elephants, giraffes, countless species of antelope, all drawn to this permanent water source. And where the herds went, people followed. This is where the story becomes human. Archaeologists have found ancient tool-making sites, carefully placed along these fossil shorelines. The camps of hunters and gatherers who lived beside this resource. These communities didn't just survive, they likely thrived, with a reliable bounty of fish from the lake and game from the savanna. The lake was their supermarket, their highway, the center of their world. All this evidence paints a picture, not of a harsh struggle, but of an abundance that's almost unimaginable when you look at the region now. That contrast is made clear by the lake's last remaining fragment, modern Lake Chad. It sits on the border of 4 nations. It's a puddle compared to its ancestor. Less than 5% of the size Megachad once was, and it continues to shrink under modern pressures. This small, struggling body of water is a living symbol of what was lost. A direct link to that vanished aquatic world. It asks a quiet question. If this little lake is all that remains, what incredible stories disappeared when those vast blue waters finally faded away? Megachad was over in the east, but in the west, right in the middle of the desert, there was another giant, central Algeria, these highlands. It's all silence now. These plateaus, the Onat and Mawadir basins, a completely dry place. The wind just works on the stone. A lake there seems impossible. But the geology, it tells you something else. Those basins aren't just dips, they're like empty bathtubs from a world that's gone. This was the Onat Mawadir Megalake system, a whole network of lakes and waterways all connected. It used to moderate the climate for the whole central Sahara. It wasn't one massive thing like Megachad. It was more like a web, a complex one, resilient. Paleoecologists figured this out from very delicate clues: pollen grains preserved in ancient mud. These tiny capsules, they show an incredible ecological picture. Along these lakeshores, Mediterranean plants grew: cypress, olive, right alongside Sahelian species, acacia, grasses. This lake system was a crossroads, a climatic crossroads where different botanical worlds met, all sustained by the moisture from the lakes. The key to it was hydrological connectivity. They were linked, these lakes, rivers and streams flowed between them, and they were connected to underground aquifers, huge stores of water in the rock. That created a buffer, a safety net. If one lake shrank during a dry period, water could come from another lake or seep up from below. It was a network built to endure. And where you have enduring water, lush vegetation, life just follows in abundance. The most direct record of that life isn't from bones, it's from art. Hundreds of miles to the east of these basins, in the Tassili Enaja Mountains, there's an open-air art gallery there. Thousands of Neolithic paintings and engravings on the rock walls. Many of these scenes are tied directly to those vanished western lakes. You see detailed depictions of people swimming, their bodies arcing through clear water. Herds of cattle, healthy, being led to drink, hippos, crocodiles, daily life centered on a vibrant aquatic world. These aren't just imaginative drawings. They're historical documents, eyewitness accounts, painted by people who lived that reality. The artists sat on shores we can't see anymore, looked out at water that's long gone. And they recorded the beauty of their home, the bounty. This art turns the pollen data, the geological models, into something human. It shows the life the Megalakes sustained wasn't an abstract idea. It was a lived experience, community, ceremony, a deep connection to a world full of water. When you look at those swimming figures now, you're not just looking at art. You're looking through a window into a green Sahara that was truly alive. Those western lakes weren't the only giants. There was another one far to the east. In what's now southwestern Libya, there's a basin called the Fezzan. It's all sand now, one of the driest places on Earth, but under that sand is the ghost of another great water. A series of huge paleolakes that once filled that deep depression. And the story of this place is told in two different languages. One is geology, the other is myth. Geologists have drilled into the Fezzan Basin. They've pulled up sediment cores, and those cores tell a clear story. They find these thick layers of a soft, white rock. It's called diatomite, and that's the key. Diatomite is made almost entirely of fossilized shells, from microscopic algae called diatoms. These tiny things only live in clear, freshwater lakes. So finding massive deposits of this in a desert, it's like finding a fossilized rainforest under ice. It's proof a deep, persistent lake system was here. One that lasted for thousands of years, letting these immense biological layers build up. But long before any drill touched that diatomite, a story about this place was already being told. Ancient Greek writers like Herodotus recorded a legend of a great lake in Libya called Lake Tritonis. In the myth, that was the birthplace of the goddess Athena. It was described as a vast inland sea surrounded by lush land. For centuries, that was considered pure mythology, a fantastical story about a distant place. But a compelling idea has emerged. Some classicists and geographers suggest the legend might not be pure invention. It could be a distant cultural echo. A memory of the real megalakes of the Fezzan, carried north across the Mediterranean through ancient trade routes. Imagine a Berber trader millennia ago describing his homeland's great inland sea to a Greek merchant. The story gets passed down, transformed, eventually attached to the gods. It's a powerful intersection where hard geological evidence meets the soft, enduring power of folklore. The real lake fades, but its memory, reshaped by time, lives on. And this intersection of water and human ingenuity didn't end with myth. The physical legacy of those lakes had a direct impact on a civilization that rose much later. Long after the Fezzan lakes vanished from the surface, their water remained, trapped deep underground in vast aquifers. Like a buried treasure, centuries later, a people called the Garamantes discovered this treasure. They mastered the desert not by waiting for rain, but by mining the fossil water from the Paleolakes. They engineered sophisticated underground channels, called fogaras, tunnels dug deep into the ground, sometimes for miles, to tap the ancient aquifer. To guide the water to their fields and cities, the Garamantes built a powerful, urban civilization in the heart of the Sahara, a network of towns all sustained by water that was thousands of years old. They were living off the inheritance of a lost green world. Their entire society was a monument to the megalakes that came before. It shows the end of the Green Sahara wasn't just an ending. It was a transformation. Water that once sparkled under the sun retreated into the earth, and human cleverness learned how to follow it, building a new kind of life in the process. The story of these vanished lakes isn't just a legend. It's something modern science is working on. To find a lake that disappeared thousands of years ago, you have to think like a detective. You need clues that last in the desert. The first tool, the most powerful one, is the view from space. Satellites aren't just taking pictures, they use radar. Instruments like the ones on NASA's shuttle radar topography mission, they send down microwave pulses. Those pulses go through the dry, thin layer of sand on top. They bounce off the harder, older ground underneath. What comes back is a map of a hidden landscape, ghost rivers, empty basins. The radar shows the subtle ridges, concentric rings of ancient shorelines. They're called cheniers, like bathtub rings for a continent-sized lake, left behind as the water level dropped slowly over centuries. You can see them from orbit. Faint lines in the earth, they tell a story of where water once was, but seeing the shape is just the start. To understand the life of the lake, you have to go to the ground. Scientists take core samples. They drive long, hollow tubes into the dried mud of the lakebed. It pulls up a vertical timeline. In those muddy layers, they find a library. Pollen grains, tiny, nearly indestructible from grasses and trees long dead. Shells from microscopic creatures, diatoms that only lived in fresh water. Even the chemical fingerprints of the water itself, locked in the isotopes of the sediment. Each layer is a page, and we can date those pages with radiocarbon dating. When a freshwater snail lived in the lake, it absorbed carbon from its environment. When it died, its shell settled into the mud. That shell is a time capsule. Scientists can measure the decay of a specific carbon isotope in that shell. It tells them with precision when that snail was alive, when the lake was full. This turns a story into a history with dates, with durations. We can say this lake was here and thriving 6,200 years ago. The physical evidence on the ground is everywhere once you know how to look. In the middle of a stark desert plain, you might find a band of pebbles perfectly rounded. In a place where no river has flowed for millennia, those pebbles were tumbled smooth by ancient waves. On a rocky plateau, you might see a smooth, flat shelf cut into the cliff face, a wave-cut terrace, a place where lake waters lashed against stone, day after day, year after year, slowly planing it flat. These are the silent witnesses, stubborn. They refuse to be erased by time. Maybe the most profound connection between that past world and our present one is in a place called the Megalake Depression. Today, it looks like the end of the world, a vast, low basin in Chad, part of the footprint of the mighty Megachad. It's now the single largest source of dust on Earth. Satellite images show massive dust plumes, like brown rivers in the sky, streaming out of that region. That dust is the ancient lakebed itself, the fine silt that settled on the bottom of that giant lake over thousands of years. Now the wind scours it up and carries it across the Atlantic. That Saharan dust fertilizes the Amazon rainforest. It feeds plankton blooms in the ocean. The ghost of Lake Megachad isn't gone. It's in the air we breathe. It's part of a global system, a system that began when the Green Sahara faded away. This science does more than confirm a lost world. It shows how deeply interconnected our planet's story is. A change in one continent's climate doesn't just rewrite that continent. It sends ripples across the globe for thousands of years. But this discovery leads to a deeper mystery. If these lakes were so vast, so stable, so full of life, what could possibly make them disappear? The Megalake Depression dust comes from a planetary clock. To know why the lakes disappeared, you have to know why they were there in the first place. And that answer is in a slow, celestial dance. It rewrites the climate rules. That's orbital forcing. Earth's trip around the sun isn't a steady loop. The planet wobbles on its axis. Its orbit stretches and contracts. Those are the Milankovitch cycles. They're the master clock for ice ages and warm periods. For the Sahara, one cycle mattered most, the precession of the equinoxes. A 26,000-year cycle. It changes which hemisphere is tilted toward the sun in summer, like a slow shift in the seasons on the planet's calendar. About 11,000 years ago, that cycle meant northern hemisphere summer happened when Earth was closest to the sun. The difference in sunlight was small. Just a few percent, but in a system as vast as a continent, a small push can trigger a monumental change. That extra summer sunlight was the spark. It landed on North Africa. The land heated up faster than the Atlantic Ocean next to it. Hot air rose over the continent that created a low-pressure zone, and that zone acted like a giant vacuum. It pulled in moisture-laden winds from the south. It supercharged the West African monsoon, pulled it hundreds of miles farther north than it goes today. Where now there's dry, descending air, there was a conveyor belt of rain. That was the climatic engine for the Green Sahara, but the engine had a secret. A series of feedback loops, they turned a temporary shift into a 6,000-year paradise. Climate modelers run simulations of that ancient world. Their digital recreations show it. The initial monsoon rains triggered a cascade. Rain let plants grow. Those plants, grasses and shrubs, stabilized the soil. They reduced the amount of reflective dust in the air. A darker surface absorbs more heat. That strengthens the low-pressure system, pulls in even more monsoon moisture. The plants themselves also released water vapor through their leaves. Added to the local humidity, it was a virtuous cycle. More rain meant more plants meant more rain. This self-reinforcing system locked the region into a stable, humid state. It wasn't just a lucky period of good weather. It was a different climatic mode entirely. A mode sustained by the living landscape it created. The megalakes were both a product and a pillar of that system. Their vast surfaces evaporated water into the air, fed local rain clouds. They were giant blue engines of their own climate. For millennia, that system held. The orbital clock provided the initial nudge, and the Earth's own biosphere did the rest, built and maintained an oasis of staggering scale. That celestial clockwork is the ultimate author of the story. It reminds you the ground beneath your feet, the aridity of a desert, isn't permanent. It's a temporary arrangement in a much longer, grander rhythm. A rhythm written in stone, in pollen, and in the silent, concentric rings of a vanished shore. The shoreline of Lake Megachad, it would have been a deafening chorus of life. You could have a single stretch of beach, a Saharan cheetah adapted to open plains coming to drink at dawn, and just a few hundred yards away, a Nile crocodile sliding into the water. Herds of waterbuck and gazelle at the water's edge. Overhead, flocks of migratory bird storks, ducks darkening the sky. This wasn't random, it was a structured ecosystem. A biological crossroads. Paleontologists see it in the fossil assemblages from those lake beds. They find predator bones, prey bones, mixed with mollusk shells and fish scales. That tells a story of complex food webs. The lakes were the anchor. They supported huge fish populations, which fed the crocodiles and the birds. The grasslands around the shores supported large herbivores, and those herds supported their own predators. It was a complete world, a self-reinforcing world. And that world served a larger purpose. In climate history, these megalakes acted as refugia. That's a safe haven. When drier periods crept in, squeezing the savannas, these giant lakes remained wet. They became islands of green. For thousands of years, species could retreat there. They could survive generation after generation, while the world beyond the shorelines changed. This had a profound effect on the evolution of African wildlife. You find the genetic echoes of that lost world in unexpected places. Take fish. Scientists studying tilapia genetics found populations in Saharan oases. Populations related to fish in the Nile and to fish in West African rivers. The only logical explanation is a direct aquatic connection, a watery highway across the Sahara. Provided by these vast, interconnected lake systems. When the lakes vanished, the fish populations were stranded, separated by an ocean of sand, their shared ancestry held in their DNA. The land animals tell a more poignant story. The fossil record includes species that have since vanished from the continent or retreated far south. There was a distinct, now extinct type of North African elephant. The bones of the African wild ass are common. These animals weren't just visiting, they were residents of a Green Sahara. It shows the ecological communities we now associate with sub-Saharan Africa once stretched all the way to the Mediterranean coast. The desertification of the Sahara wasn't just a change in scenery, it was a massive loss of habitat. It fragmented populations, it drove species to extinction in the north. It forced a great retreat southward. The cost was a narrowing of biodiversity for an entire region. The rock art in places like Tassili-en-Najjar gives faces to this loss. Those paintings of giraffes, elephants, rhinos, they aren't just symbols, they are portraits of a reality that is gone. They show the life that was sacrificed when the rains failed and the lakes shrank. This asks us to see the Sahara not as an empty place, but as a landscape of profound absence, a silence where there was once a roar. The water was a home. Think about a family 10,000 years ago in a canoe on Lake Megachad, a father fishing, a mother watching the shore, a child with a hand in the water. And behind them, grasslands, a horizon they might never have thought to cross. That was the world for people in the Green Sahara. We know their story from what they left along the old shorelines. They lived during that long summer. Their culture reflected that abundance. We see it best at a place called Gobero, in Niger, in the Tenere Desert now, which is one of the driest places. But back then, Gobero was a cemetery by a lake. Archaeologists found people buried there. Their bones showed they were tall, strong, healthy. They had a good life. A reliable diet. These weren't people just surviving, they were thriving. The graves were arranged with care, artifacts placed beside them that points to a spiritual life. A respect for the dead, a sense of place. They buried their loved ones in the sand near the water. A connection to that specific spot. The objects from Gobero show their daily life. They adapted to everything the lake offered. They made harpoons and fishhooks from bone, a real fishing culture. They made pottery, some of the earliest in Africa. Decorated with patterns, wavy lines, dots, maybe for water or nets. These weren't just tools. This was art from an aquatic world. They also had grinding stones for processing wild grains from the lakeside. That suggests something, a move toward a more settled life, where you could store things, process them. Which raises a question, were they just foragers, or were they starting to manage their world? The evidence hints at structure. The abundance of fish and game could mean less moving around. Families might return to the same bays each season. Some think they may have managed wild sheep, not farmers but resource managers. Their whole society was tied to the lakes. The technology, the art, the beliefs. The lake was their calendar, their pantry, their highway. Then the climate began to turn. The orbital cycle shifted. The summer sun weakened over North Africa. The monsoon rain started to fail, to pull back south. The feedback loops reversed. Fewer plants meant more dust. That weakened the rains more. The lakes began to shrink, cut off from their sources. A long surrender to the sun. The shorelines retreated, season after season. Generation after generation. The people at Gobero would have seen this change in their own lifetimes. Watching fishing spots turn to dry land. Watching the grasslands recede as dunes advanced. The world that sustained their ancestors was fading, evaporating around them. So what do you do when your entire way of life, a culture built on water, is disappearing? The desert is quiet, but it holds voices. You walk into a rock shelter on that plateau, Tassili Enaja. The air gets cool, the light is dim, but the walls there alive. Covered paintings and engravings from the floor all the way up. It's an archive, a breathtaking one, of a world that's gone. This isn't abstract, it's testimony. Direct testimony, a record of life in the Green Sahara made by the people who were there. The artists sat on shores we can't see anymore. They looked out at water we can't touch. And they captured their reality with stunning clarity. For historians, for archaeologists, this rock art is a primary source. It gives details that pollen cores can't. Sediment layers can't. It shows the daily rhythm, the cultural practices, the feeling of that lost time. Scholars see distinct phases in the art. They tell a story of change. Profound change. The earliest phase is the Roundhead period. The figures are enigmatic, mystical. They're large, human-like forms with rounded heads, featureless. They are shown in postures that seem ceremonial, floating, dancing. There are no animals in these early scenes. The focus is entirely on these spiritual beings. Some researchers see this as a time when people were first encountering this new, abundant landscape. Their art reflected wonder, maybe a mythology forming around the fact of their lush home. It was an art of the mind, of belief. Then the art shifts dramatically. This is the Bovidian period, and here the walls come alive with the world science has been reconstructing. The mystical figures recede. In their place are scenes, vivid, detailed scenes of daily life. The name comes from the Latin for cattle, bos, and cattle are everywhere. Herds of them, majestic, long-horned beasts. People are shown tending them, milking them, leading them to water. This is a society tied to domesticated animals. But you look closer, the scenes are set against a backdrop of lakes, rivers. You see people in boats paddling. You see hippopotamuses, their bulky bodies half submerged. You see crocodiles, giraffes bending to drink, elephants. Every animal science says lived there is on these walls. One famous panel shows a figure swimming. Using a technique we'd recognize today, their body arcing through the water with perfect form, the artists worked with what they had, natural mineral pigments. Ochres for red and yellow, charcoal for black, clay for white. They mixed these with animal fats, plant resins. To make paint for engravings, they used harder stones. To peck and scrape images right into the rock, the scale is humbling. Thousands of sites, tens of thousands of images. This wasn't a casual hobby, it was a central cultural practice. A way of marking territory, recording history, passing knowledge down. Dating this work is a challenge. You can't use radiocarbon dating on a painting of a cow. But scientists have methods. Sometimes they find microscopic fragments of organic material trapped in the paint binder. Sometimes they date a layer of desert varnish that formed over the engraving. That gives a minimum age. What the dates suggest is that the Bovidian period, this golden age of pastoral life by the lakes, lasted for millennia. It corresponds perfectly with the African Humid period. And then the art changes again. The herds grow smaller. The scenes of water become less frequent. The images start to include horses, chariots, symbols of a drier, more mobile way of life. The artists were recording their own climate change in real time. That's what makes these galleries so powerful. They're not just pictures of animals. They're a human testament, poignant, the work of people who knew abundance, who painted that abundance with love and precision, even as they watched it fade. When we look at that figure swimming, we're not looking at a symbol, we're looking at a memory, a personal, human memory of a day at the lake, preserved in stone for over 6,000 years. It turns abstract climate data into a story of loss, one we can feel, and it raises the question, the haunting one, when the water was finally gone and the paintings were all that remained, what stories did they tell their children about the world that was? Those painted memories on the rock walls aren't the only place the lost waters live on. A landscape changes that completely. It leaves a mark in the ground, but also in the mind. Across cultures, when something as fundamental as water vanishes, people tell stories about it. They encode that shock of loss into myth. It becomes a memory passed down, slowly turning from history into legend. So the echoes of the Saharan megalakes, could they have traveled that path? Could they be hiding in plain sight in the ancient stories we still tell? Comparative mythologists have noticed a pattern. In traditions around the world, there are these recurring motifs: great floods, lost paradises, inland seas that mysteriously disappeared. Many of these stories are tied to local river floods or symbolic rebirth, but some scholars suggest a handful might preserve an older, climatic memory. A memory of a time when entire regions were reshaped by retreating waters. North Africa and the Mediterranean world are rich with such tales. Some bear a striking, if poetic, resemblance to the world science has revealed. Take the ancient Egyptian concept of none. In their cosmology, before creation, there was only none. An infinite, dark, primeval ocean, a chaotic water from which the first mound of earth emerged. This isn't just a story about the Nile's flood. The imagery is of a vast, all-encompassing water that predates the ordered world. Could that be a distant cultural memory? A time when water, not sand, dominated the landscape to the west of the Nile Valley. A time when the idea of a desert wasn't yet formed, and the world truly did begin from a great inland sea. Then there's the Greek legend of Lake Tritonis, recorded by Herodotus, a massive inland sea in Libya, the birthplace of the goddess Athena. For centuries that was dismissed as fantasy. But we now know the Fezzan Basin held those colossal paleolakes. The geographical description fits. The idea of a great lake in that precise location is no longer impossible. It becomes plausible that early Greek travelers or traders from the south brought back tales of a vast water in the interior. Over centuries, the description of a real place could have been woven into divine myth. Its origins forgotten, but its core image preserved. This pattern continues in the oral traditions of the people who never left the Sahara. Berber and Tuareg folklore is filled with references to a time when the desert was green. Stories speak of ancestors who lived beside great lakes, who herded cattle on lush pastures. There are tales of powerful spirits, jinn, associated with specific dry riverbeds, guarding the memory of the water that once flowed there. These aren't detailed historical accounts. They're the weathered remnants of memory shaped by time and retelling. But their persistence is telling. They consistently point back to a reality that contradicts the present emptiness, proving a direct link between a specific myth and a specific paleolake is nearly impossible. The chain of storytelling over thousands of years is too fragile, too subject to change, but that might be missing the point. The value isn't in a one-to-one correlation. It's in recognizing the collective pattern. When multiple, unrelated cultures in a region share stories about a radically different, water-rich past, it suggests a deep, shared experience. The myths become a kind of cultural sediment layer, a fingerprint left not in stone but in story of a climatic past too monumental to be entirely forgotten. These narratives served a purpose. They explained the unexplainable. They gave meaning to hippo bones found in dry sand. They provided an origin for wave-smoothed stones in the middle of nowhere. And most importantly, they carried a warning or a hope. They preserved the knowledge that the world had not always been this way. That change on a grand scale was possible. This mythological memory is a testament to human resilience. It shows that even when the lakes dried up and the grasslands turned to dust, the people found a way to carry the essence of that lost world with them. Not in pots or tools, but in the stories they told around the fire, under a sky that once held more clouds. The painted swimmer on the rock wall would have seen the shoreline pull back. Over seasons, over years, the water's edge kept retreating. What had been a clear beach turned into a marsh, reeds moved in. Then the marsh itself dried out, became a cracked, hard plain. And then the wind started, piling the first dunes against those old wave-cut terraces. That was the beginning of the desert. It wasn't one event like a gate closing. It was a complex collapse, a cascade, starting around 5,000 years ago. The master clock, the orbital cycle, had begun to turn. The northern hemisphere was tilting slowly away from its peak summer sun. The initial nudge was gentle, just a slight weakening of the monsoon rains, but in a system as finely balanced as the Green Sahara, a small push was enough to start a chain reaction. Climate models show this wasn't a linear decline. It was a series of tipping points where the landscape itself turned against the climate that made it. The first critical feedback loop was the plants. As the summer rains became less reliable, patches of grassland began to die. That exposed the bare, sandy soil underneath. And that changed everything. Light-colored sand reflects far more sunlight than dark green vegetation. That reflectivity is called albedo. As the albedo increased, the land absorbed less heat. That weakened the thermal low-pressure system over North Africa. The the very engine that pulled the monsoon rains north. A weaker engine pulled in less moisture. So it rained even less, which killed more plants, which exposed more reflective soil. A vicious cycle had begun. Then a second feedback kicked in: dust. With less plant cover to hold it down, the fine soil particles began to lift into the air. Ancient marine sediment cores from the Atlantic Ocean, just off West Africa, tell this part of the story. Around 5,200 years ago, the layers of silt show a massive spike in dust. The amount of wind-blown material triples, then quadruples. This wasn't gradual, it was a regime shift, captured in the mud at the bottom of the sea. All that dust in the atmosphere acted like a sunshade. It scattered incoming solar radiation, cooling the land surface further. But it also had a more direct effect. The dust particles gave water vapor countless surfaces to condense on, high up, creating clouds that were less likely to produce rain. So the dust itself actively suppressed rainfall. On the ground, the pollen record shows the unraveling. In sediment cores from ancient lake beds, you see a succession. First, the pollen of trees and lush grasses dominates. Then, as it dries, the tree pollen vanishes. The record becomes all hardy grasses. Then the grass pollen dwindles, replaced by desert shrubs and dry land plants. Finally, even that pollen disappears, leaving a sterile layer of sand and dust. The land was emptying itself of life. Step by step, this evidence shows an ecosystem crossing a threshold. The change wasn't a slow fade from green to brown. It was a stumble, then a fall. There were likely periods of partial recovery, especially around the remaining megalakes. They acted as buffers, but the overall trajectory was locked in. The feedback loops the dying plants, the rising albedo, the choking dust. They amplified the initial orbital shift. They accelerated the drying, turning a climatic trend into a continental catastrophe. It shows a profound fragility. The Green Sahara, for all its majesty and stability, existed in a delicate balance, a paradise built on a specific alignment of celestial mechanics, sustained by its own living fabric. When that alignment shifted, the fabric began to unravel, and the system collapsed with a speed and finality that reshaped human history. The communities who had thrived for millennia now faced a choice: adapt, migrate, or face a gathering hardship. Their story isn't in the pollen, it's in the paths they chose to walk across the new sand. The lakes ended with salt. When the rain stopped and the rivers faded, the balance broke. For a long time, water kept coming in, from the mountains, from the seasons. But then that inflow just ended. The sun was the only thing left. Evaporation took over. It started winning, but the lakes didn't die the same way. They went different directions. That's what made the landscapes we see now. The process is called desiccation. It's the slow drying of a water body. When a lake evaporates, it doesn't just shrink. It changes. The water gets saltier, more concentrated. The pure water leaves. Minerals that were dissolved start to crystallize. They fall to the bottom. Those are evaporites, huge, flat plains of white salt and gypsum. In the Sahara, those are the chots and sebkas, those bright white, cracked areas you see from above. They're the chemical ghosts of the lakes. The last breath turned to crystal. Lake Megachad shows this the clearest. Its retreat was a slow collapse recorded in the land. The water level dropped, but not evenly. It would hold at a certain level for decades, for centuries, then fall again. Each pause left a shoreline, a ridge of sediment, like a step on a staircase going down into nothing. Scientists have mapped these old shorelines. They show the lake shrinking in steps. From its huge size, it pulled back to a smaller form, then another step down. And another. With each drop, the lake broke apart. One connected sea became a series of smaller, separate lakes in the deepest spots. These remnants got saltier. The freshwater ecosystems collapsed. Fish that needed certain conditions died. Only the toughest life survived in the briny pools. The last step on that staircase leads to modern Lake Chad. A shallow wetland, just an echo of what was there. It survives now on seasonal rains and the Chari River, not the mighty rivers of the past. Other megalakes took different paths. Some enclosed basins with no outlet evaporated completely, leaving behind a vast flat pan of salt and clay where the horizon is a perfect line, the most absolute vanishings. But some of the water didn't really leave. It went underground. As the surface lakes evaporated, some water seeped down over centuries into porous rock layers below. It became fossil groundwater, trapped in time. That's the origin of some of the biggest aquifers. The Nubian sandstone aquifer system under Egypt, Libya, Chad, Sudan. It's one of those treasure vaults. It holds water that fell as rain during the Green Sahara. Water that's over 1 million years old in some places. It's a direct, liquid inheritance from the age of the Megalakes. When we pump from these aquifers, we're pumping the past, drawing on the last reserves of a vanished world. So the lakes never fully vanished, they transformed. Their water became dust in the wind, feeding distant forests. It became salt crusts painting the desert white. It became fossil memory locked in deep reservoirs. And it became myth in stories told under the desert sky. This change makes you see the Sahara differently, not as a barren wasteland, but as a palimpsest. A manuscript where the old writing, the story of water and life, is still faintly visible under the dry text of sand. The world was fading slowly. For a family living by a lake that was getting smaller, this was just life. The coves their grandparents fished in were dry now, a good walk from the water. The grasslands they hunted were thinner every year, turning to scrub, then to sand. It wasn't a sudden collapse, it was a slow pressure, a crisis that happened inch by inch over a lifetime. The community had a choice: stay and live in a drier place, or leave and try to find where the water went. This choice was happening all across the Green Sahara. Researchers see this as a huge dispersal of people driven by the climate. As the lakes broke apart and the savannas turned brown, the choices got fewer. The logical thing was to follow the rain as it pulled back. Many groups probably went south, following the belt of life as it shrank toward the Sahel. That movement would have pushed people toward the big, permanent rivers, especially the Niger River. The Niger, with its inland delta, became a new center. A place where the fishing and herding skills from the Saharan lakes could be moved and kept alive. You see possible evidence for this along the Niger's banks, where settlements and fishing seemed to increase around that time. Other people went different ways. Some might have gone north toward the Mediterranean coast and its winter rains. Others likely went east toward the one big river that cut through the desert, the Nile. The Nile Valley during this drying time would have been a powerful draw, a narrow line of guaranteed life in a continent that was turning barren. This influx of people from the west could have been a key trigger. It brought new people, new pressures, new ideas into the valley, and this leads to an idea from researchers. The end of the Green Sahara might have directly sped up one of humanity's biggest changes, the move to farming. In the stable, lush world of the big lakes, there was no reason to farm. Why work to plant seeds when the lakes and grasslands gave you so much? But when that plenty fell apart and people were crowded along the few rivers left, the situation changed. The options narrowed. The land couldn't support large, mobile groups just by hunting and gathering anymore. In the Nile Valley, that pressure, plus the knowledge of plants brought by migrants, could have pushed the experimentation that led to organized farming. The same thing probably happened along other rivers. It was innovation forced by necessity across a whole continent. Linguists and archaeologists look for other traces of this migration in what was left behind. The spread of certain language families in Africa, like Nilo-Saharan, has interesting connections to this period. Some think the early spread of those languages might follow the routes out of the drying Sahara. And changes in material culture, pottery styles, tools found in different regions after 5,000 years ago, hint at people moving and mixing. A decorative pattern from a Saharan lakeshore might show up centuries later on a pot near the Nile. This was more than people moving. It was a scattering of cultures, knowledge, genes, a pivotal moment that helped shape the human map of Africa. The communities that painted swimming figures on rock walls watched their world dissolve. But they didn't disappear. They carried its legacy. In their languages, their tools, their drive to find water, they brought the memory of the Green Sahara into the foundations of new civilizations along the great rivers. Their journey was a response written in footsteps, a slow, determined walk away from a dying paradise toward the uncertain start of something new. You're walking across a Saharan plain. Your boot crunches on something, not a stone, a bed of fossilized clamshells lying in perfect rows on the sand. It's a direct handshake from a world of water. Those shells are one clue. The megalakes are gone, but their signatures are written into the land, waiting for anyone who knows how to read them. Geologists see this landscape as an open book. The chapters are written in stone and soil. There's a subtle ridge running for miles across a flat expanse. To a traveler, it might just be a path for camels. But to a scientist, that ridge is a chenya, an ancient beach formed by waves piling up sand and shells over centuries. When the lake level stabilized, it built these quiet walls. Now they stand as fossilized shorelines, tracing the contours of a ghostly sea. Then there are the vast white deposits. In places, the desert floor is covered in a fine, chalky powder. This is diatomite. It's mined today for pool filters, but its origin is purely aquatic. It's made of microscopic, glass-like shells, from diatoms, tiny algae that thrived in the clear lake waters. When they died, their skeletons sank by the trillions, building up layers hundreds of feet thick on the lake bottom. That soft, white rock is the compressed remains of a lost ecosystem. Beneath the dunes, there are other secrets, paleosols, ancient soils. These are the fossilized grounds of the savanna, layers of earth that once supported roots and grasses. Now buried under sand, if you cut a slice through a dune, you'd see the story. A dark, rich layer full of organic matter, suddenly capped by sterile, shifting sand. It's a soil snapshot of the moment the green world was swallowed. Perhaps the most profound legacy is in the Chad Basin. The floor of the ancient Megachad is not just dry. It's the single largest source of dust on Earth. Satellite images show colossal plumes like great tan rivers in the sky, streaming out of the Bedele Depression. That dust is the lakebed itself, the fine, diatom-rich silt that settled over millennia. Now the wind scours it up and carries it across the Atlantic. This dust doesn't just disappear, it fertilizes the Amazon rainforest. It provides nutrients the jungle's own soils lack. It feeds plankton blooms in the ocean. The ghost of the Sahara's greatest lake is still a vital player. A change in North Africa sends life to South America. It's a global connection written in dust. The fossil record adds creatures to this landscape. Far older are the skeletons in Wadi al-Hitan in Egypt, the Valley of the Whales. These are the remains of ancient whales. They swam in a prehistoric sea that covered the region tens of millions of years ago. They speak to a much deeper aquatic past. Continents are forever in motion. Seas come and go on a grand scale. More directly tied to our story are fossils from the Green Sahara itself. Not far from those fossil clams, you might find the bones of a giant buffalo, or the massive skull of a hippopotamus. These are not millions of years old, they are thousands. They are the direct physical relics of the world shown in the rock art. These animals drank from the megalakes, they grazed on the savannas. Their bones, now weathering out of the dry earth, are the final proof of that lost abundance. They make the paintings real, so the past is not an abstract idea here. It is literally underfoot, in the crunch of a shell, in the path of a dune, in the dust that circles the globe. Every grain of sand in the Sahara has a story. Many of those grains began at the bottom of a lake, part of a thriving, watery world. The desert, in its silence, is not empty. It is a museum, an archive of a greener, wetter time, and we are just beginning to understand the full weight of its legacy. That dust is the lake's last breath. But some of the water went another way. It went into hiding, deep under the dunes, under the dry lake beds. There's a huge treasure resting in the dark. Fossil water, it's not like river water. It's not like a modern lake. That water gets replaced by rain. This is ancient groundwater, trapped in porous rock like a sponge locked in a vault. It was recharged slowly, over thousands of years, back in the Green Sahara. When the rain stopped, the recharge stopped. The vault was sealed. What's left is a finite inheritance. A liquid memory of a lost climate. The biggest of these vaults is the Nubian sandstone aquifer system. It stretches under parts of Egypt, Libya, Chad, Sudan. One of the largest fossil water reserves on the planet. Hydrologists talk about its scale in almost mythical terms. They estimate it holds over 150,000 cubic kilometers of water. That's more than 500 times the annual flow of the entire Nile River. But there's a critical detail. Experts emphasize this. The water is largely non-renewable. In the Sahara now, this hyper-arid climate, the tiny amount of modern rainfall that might seep down is negligible. We're not tapping a river, we're mining a reservoir. Drawing from a savings account that has no meaningful income, that brings the story from deep time right into our present. Nations sitting on top of this treasure face a profound challenge. How do you use this water to build a modern life? Libya launched one of the most ambitious engineering projects in history to answer that, the Great Man-Made River. A network of giant pipelines, thousands of kilometers long. They pump fossil water from deep well fields in the southern desert, transport it north to coastal cities and farmland. It's a river reversed in essence, pulling the legacy of the past to sustain the present. Egypt, Chad, Sudan also rely on this aquifer, countless local wells. Supporting agriculture, communities in places where surface water is a distant dream. But with that reliance comes an ethical dilemma. Every drop pumped is a drop removed from that ancient reserve. It's water that fell as rain when hippos swam in Lake Megachad. A direct physical link to the world of the rock art. Using it for irrigation or industry today is drawing down a planetary heirloom. The balance is delicate. Development promises life and growth now. Preservation asks what we leave for the future when this one-time gift is exhausted. The Nubian system isn't alone. Other aquifers, like the Merzuk Basin under Libya and Algeria, hold similar fossil water. They're all chapters of the same story. Not just geological formations, they're archives, the last places where the megalakes still exist, not as dust or salt, but as liquid itself. Tapping them is like opening a time capsule and drinking its contents. It grants life, but it also consumes a memory. This hidden water is the final, most direct connection to the Green Sahara, a treasure of unimaginable age. Being spent in our lifetime to write the next chapter of human history in the desert. The question it leaves us with isn't just one of engineering. It's a question of legacy. What do we do with the last drink from a vanished world? That fossil water comes from a different Earth, a planet whose climate followed rhythms we can see now in the sediment. Those rhythms carry a warning, though. It's a warning that echoes right into our present. The Green Sahara is a lesson in climate sensitivity. A stable, thriving system can unravel. Not with a crash, but through a cascade, one failure leading to the next. The greening started with a subtle shift in Earth's orbit, a slight increase in summer sunlight over North Africa. That small nudge pulled the monsoon rains north, and it set off a chain reaction. Lush plants stabilized the soil, they absorbed heat, and that pulled in more rain. The lakes themselves evaporated moisture to feed local clouds. For 6,000 years, this loop held the desert back, but then the orbital cycle turned. The sunlight weakened by just a few percent, and the whole process ran in reverse. The same feedbacks that built the paradise became the engine that destroyed it. Fewer plants meant more reflective sand, which weakened the rains, that killed more plants. Exposed soil became dust, and that dust further suppressed rainfall. The system didn't just dry out gradually, it crossed a threshold. It flipped into a new, arid state. Paleoclimatologists look at this as a case study. It shows our climate isn't a simple dial, it's more like a series of switches. Small pushes can trigger large changes, often irreversible changes, and the transition can be fast in geological terms. The shift from a green Sahara to the desert was largely complete within a few centuries, a blink on planetary timescales, but a span that would cover many human generations. That past transformation holds up a mirror to our own era. Today, the force changing our climate isn't a slow orbital cycle. It's the rapid release of greenhouse gases from human industry. The forcing is different, but the principle of sensitivity is the same. We're giving the global climate a massive, sustained push, and we're already seeing feedback mechanisms at work. Similar in nature to what reshaped North Africa, modern desertification in places like the Sahel just south of the Sahara shows familiar patterns. Overgrazing and deforestation remove plant cover. That exposes soil to erosion. It increases dust storms. The loss of vegetation changes local rainfall patterns. It creates a drier microclimate that makes it harder for plants to return. It's a modern echo of that ancient feedback loop. Are we witnessing the trigger of similar regional tipping points? The past suggests it's entirely possible. The collapse of the Green Sahara had profound consequences. It fragmented ecosystems. It drove species to extinction in the north. It displaced entire human societies. The scale of change was continental. The lesson from deep time isn't one of inevitable doom. It's one of profound consequence. It tells us that climate changes, once set in motion by a sufficient push, can reshape the world. In ways that are difficult to predict and even harder to reverse. The vanished megalakes are more than a curiosity. They're a monument to the power of feedbacks, to the reality of climatic tipping points. They remind us that the landscapes we take for granted, the deserts, the forests, the coastlines, they're not permanent fixtures. They're temporary arrangements on a planet that is always slowly changing. And sometimes that change comes not as a gentle trend, but as a fundamental rearrangement. Understanding this past gives us a lens for the present. It underscores the urgency of respecting the delicate balances that sustain our world, because the story written in the Saharan dust testifies to a simple, unsettling truth. Paradise is fragile, and once lost, it can remain lost for millennia. That fossil water is from a world that ended. How it ended is a modern scientific mystery. It rewrites how we think about climate change. Was the Green Sahara a slow fade or a sudden collapse? The evidence tells two stories. Scientists are still piecing it together. Look at the pollen from ancient lake beds. It often shows a gradual change. Over hundreds of years, thousands of years, tree pollen gives way to grass pollen. Then the grass pollen dwindles. It's replaced by desert scrub. It looks like a slow retreat of life, a long goodbye. That data suggests a gradual drying. Each generation lived in a world just a little bit drier than the last, but other records tell a different story. Take the dust. Those deep-sea sediment cores off West Africa show a dramatic spike. The amount of Saharan dust triples in a very short time. This isn't a gentle ramp-up, it's a switch being flipped. It signals a sudden, massive increase in aridity. In wind erosion, something changed fast. The most compelling clues come from a specific lake in Chad, Lake Yowa. It's a rare, permanent water body in the Sahara today. Its sediments have captured an unbroken diary of the last 6,000 years. Scientists drilled into Lake Yowa. They pulled up a core like a climate film strip. They can count the layers almost like tree rings. What they found was startling. The sediment layers show a very sharp boundary. Below a certain line, the mud is dark, rich with organic matter and freshwater algae. Above that line, the sediment is light, salty, full of wind-blown dust. The transition isn't blended, it's stark. Like a page torn in a book, analysis suggests this shift happened fast, from a stable freshwater lake to a salty, dust-dominated system within just 2 or 3 centuries. Maybe even faster, a blink of an eye in geological time. For the people living there, it wouldn't have been a slow background process. It would have been a crisis unfolding within a few lifetimes. A grandmother might have told stories of a lake teeming with fish. Her grandchildren would have watched the last reliable bay turn into a salty marsh. Archaeology adds another layer. At sites across the Sahara, settlements along fossil shorelines show clear abandonment, tools, hearths, and then nothing. A layer of sterile sand blows over the top. These aren't sites that show a slow thinning out. They show people leaving and not coming back. The timing of these abandonments seems to cluster, hinting at a rapid environmental push. So which is it, gradual or abrupt? The leading theory now tries to reconcile both. It suggests the climate forcing was gradual, the orbital shift, but the ecosystem's response was not. It was held in a stable, green state by powerful feedback loops for millennia. Then, as the drying pressure slowly built, the system reached a breaking point, a threshold, and once crossed, those same feedbacks that sustained the paradise violently reversed. The collapse cascaded. Vegetation died off rapidly, exposing soil. Dust storms erupted. The monsoon rains failed catastrophically. What looked like a gradual pressure from the orbital clock resulted in a rapid, regional collapse on the ground. This concept is called a tipping point. It's one of the most important ideas from the Sahara's past. It means our climate and ecosystems don't always change in smooth, predictable lines. They can exist in stable states for long periods, resisting small pushes, but with enough sustained pressure, they can flip, suddenly, into a new, equally stable but very different state. Once that flip happens, returning to the old state is incredibly difficult. It might require a push even stronger than the one that caused the collapse. The mystery of the Sahara's end is more than an academic debate. It's a warning written in stone and dust. It tells us environmental change can be non-linear. It can be rapid, and its consequences for human societies are profound. The people who painted those vibrant scenes on the cave walls weren't just documenting their world. They were, perhaps without knowing it, recording the final chapter of a climate state about to vanish forever. The tipping point left a clear line in the sediment. But there's another question. Could human activity have helped draw that line? It's a modern mystery. Did our ancestors play a role in ending their own paradise long before the industrial age? This connects to the Anthropocene, the idea that human activity becomes the main force shaping the planet. Most scientists mark its start in the last century. But the seeds might have been planted much earlier, in the dust of the Sahara itself. The hypothesis is this: those pastoral societies in the rock art. Their success relied on large herds of cattle. As the climate slowly turned more arid, those growing herds needed more land to graze. Overgrazing, even unintentional, could have stripped the vegetation. That would expose the soil, make it vulnerable to erosion, and it could have triggered those same feedback loops, increased reflectivity, dust generation. The ones the climate models show. In this view, human activity wasn't the main cause, but an accelerator, a pressure that pushed a stressed ecosystem over the edge sooner. And faster. Then there's fire. Early pastoralists likely used controlled burns to manage land, to clear old growth and encourage new grass for their herds. In a stable, wet climate, that practice is useful. In a drying one, it could become destructive. Repeated burning might have stopped forests from coming back. It could have shifted plant communities toward more fire-resistant species, species that don't stabilize the soil as well. Scientists look for evidence in microscopic charcoal. Preserved in lake sediments, a spike in charcoal could mean more frequent fires. Some records do show increases during the later stages of the Green Sahara. But linking that definitively to human activity is hard. Was it people, or was it natural wildfires from lightning in a drying landscape? Interdisciplinary teams have built models to test this. Some simulations suggest even moderate grazing pressure could have significantly reduced vegetation cover. That reduction could have amplified the climatic drying, potentially shortening the humid period by centuries. The human impact in these models acts as a catalyst. It doesn't change the ultimate outcome set by the orbital cycle, but it alters the speed, the severity of the transition. Other researchers push back. They argue the climatic drivers were so powerful, the orbital forcing and the feedbacks, that any human influence would have been a tiny ripple. The Sahara's transformation was continental. Scattered groups of Neolithic herders with stone tools and manageable herds, meaningfully altering such a vast system. That stretches credibility. The natural climate signal in the data is so strong, they say, it drowns out any human signature. That's the core difficulty of the mystery. Separating the human signal from the natural one in the paleo record. It's like trying to hear a single voice in a roaring stadium. The pollen data shows a shift from trees to grasses, then to desert plants. But was that shift driven purely by less rain, or was it partly because herds were eating tree seedlings, preventing forests from recovering after droughts? The charcoal layers show more fires, but were they set by people or by a hotter, drier climate? Each piece of evidence can be read in multiple ways. This mystery does more than debate an ancient event. It forces a confrontation with a long, complex interplay between humans and their environment. It asks us to consider responsibility on a deep time scale. If those early herders did hasten the change, even slightly, it wasn't malice. It was an unintended consequence of success. A thriving culture maximizing the bounty of their world, unaware of the fragile balance beneath their feet. Their story becomes an early chapter in a much longer narrative of adaptation and consequence. It reminds us the line between living within an ecosystem and inadvertently altering it is often very thin, and rarely seen until long after it's been crossed. The archaeologist's tool isn't just a trowel anymore. It's a satellite image on a screen. You can sit in an office hundreds of miles away and scan huge parts of the Sahara. You're looking for these faint, geometric shadows, shapes that suggest human hands, circular stone foundations, the outlines of huts that collapsed long ago. Ancient trackways leading to a dry basin. These things are often invisible if you're standing right there. The sand, the subtle vegetation, it hides them. But from space, with the right kind of eyes, they emerge. That's satellite archaeology, and it's changing how we search for the people of the Green Sahara. It lets researchers ask a new question. Where exactly did those communities live around the shores of the vanished lakes? The answer is coming into view. Sight by invisible sight. The trick is seeing what the human eye can't. That's where multispectral imaging comes in. Satellites don't just take pictures of the light we see. They measure reflections across many wavelengths, including infrared, and that shows subtle differences, the health of plants, the moisture in the soil. A buried stone wall, for instance, it changes how water drains, how plants grow above it. over a buried wall, the vegetation might be stunted a faint line. Over an ancient ditch where the soil is richer, plants might grow taller and greener. These are crop marks, soil marks. From orbit, they can sketch a blueprint. A blueprint of a forgotten settlement. People in this field describe it as reading the landscape's memory. The ground remembers what was built on it. The satellites translate that memory into a map. Some of the biggest discoveries use surprisingly simple technology. Researchers, even dedicated amateurs, they use public imagery. Like on Google Earth, they scan the fringes of the ancient lake Megachad. They find the fossil shorelines that geology has identified, and then they look for patterns. The results are staggering. Hundreds of potential sites, maybe thousands, pinpointed, concentric circles of stones that might be old livestock enclosures. Clusters of small, circular depressions may be hut foundations, lines that could be paths or boundaries. Each one is a waypoint, a dot on a map that says people lived here. This method gives you a survey on a continental scale, the kind that would take generations of grueling groundwork. It tells scientists where to go, where to focus their time, their resources for excavation. For areas with more vegetation, like the Sahelian fringe, another technology comes in: LiDAR. Light detection and ranging. It works by sending laser pulses from an aircraft down to the ground and measuring how they come back. It creates a detailed, three-dimensional map of the surface. It can digitally strip away the trees and shrubs, reveal the ground beneath. It's less common in the open, sandy Sahara where features are already exposed. But for the greener margins, the potential is huge. It could reveal entire networks of settlements along river valleys that once flowed into the Megalakes, all hidden now under a thin layer of forest or scrub. This high-tech detective work, it's doing more than finding old stones. It's filling in the human map of the Green Sahara, turning the broad story of a green period into a specific tapestry, a tapestry of human habitation. You can start to see population densities, how communities were distributed around a lakeshore, whether they clustered in certain bays or spread evenly along the coast. That data can answer deeper questions about social structure, trade, how people interacted with an environment that was incredibly abundant. Every new circle on a satellite image is a promise, a story waiting to be uncovered, a single family's hearth, a community's meeting place, a craftsman's workshop. All silent for millennia, now whispering their locations across the void of space. This is how we're starting to meet the people of the lost lakes, not just through their bones or their art, but through the footprints of their homes etched invisibly into the earth and finally seen from the sky. You can see a river of dust from space. Every year, this huge plume of fine tan particles lifts from one specific place in the Sahara, the Badele Depression in Chad. It gets carried on the trade winds, streaming west across the Atlantic, thousands of miles. That's not just a weather event. It's the last active breath of Lake Megachad. That dust is the ancient lakebed itself, the silt, the ground-up shells of diatoms that settled on the bottom over thousands of years. Now it's taking flight. This journey is one of the most vital legacies of those vanished megalakes, a global connection written in the air. Scientists call it the planet's largest migration of dust. The Badele Depression is built for this. It sits right at the foot of the Taibesti Mountains, which funnel and accelerate the wind, and the ground is a flat, dry plain of loose sediment, full of those ancient diatoms. The perfect recipe. When the winds line up, they scour that ancient lake floor, lifting millions of tons of particles into the sky. And these particles aren't just inert dirt. They're a nutrient cocktail, rich in phosphorus and iron, minerals that are essential for plants but scarce in a lot of places. This is where the journey becomes a lifeline. After about a week over the ocean, a lot of this dust settles over the Amazon basin. The data shows the link. The phosphorus that falls with the dust acts as a critical fertilizer. The Amazon's own soils are surprisingly poor, leached of nutrients. The jungle's constant, lush growth depends on a continuous input from outside. So in a real sense, the Sahara feeds the Amazon. They estimate tens of millions of tons of this dust make the crossing each year, carrying thousands of tons of phosphorus. It replenishes what the intense life of the rainforest consumes. Without this annual gift from a dead lake, the Amazon would be far less vibrant. The dust does something else over the open ocean. The iron in it fertilizes marine phytoplankton. Those microscopic plant-like organisms are the base of the ocean's food web. When iron-rich dust settles on the water, it triggers massive phytoplankton blooms. Those blooms pull carbon dioxide from the air, and they support entire ecosystems of fish and other life. So the dust from a dried-up African lake also fuels the Atlantic Ocean. It's a cascade, starting with a windstorm in the desert and ending with nourishment for forests and seas an ocean away. There's a deep irony here. The death of one of the world's greatest freshwater systems, the Saharan Megalakes, created a continuous support system for another of the world's greatest ecosystems. The very process of desertification, the drying that turned lake beds to dust, built this planetary nutrient conveyor belt. It shows that nothing in the Earth system is ever truly lost. It's transformed, its legacy gets woven into new, unexpected patterns. This dust connection means the story of the Green Sahara isn't a closed chapter. It's an ongoing process. Every grain that leaves the Bedele Depression is a reminder. The continents aren't isolated. An event in North Africa's deep past still whispers through the canopy of South America and stirs the life in the deep blue sea. The lakes vanished from sight, but their substance, their role in nurturing life, continues on a planetary scale. That dust feeding the Amazon, it comes from water. It's a link between a world that's gone and the one we live in now. And that link makes you ask a question. Why should we care about lakes that disappeared thousands of years ago? The answer is practical. Understanding that deep past isn't just about history. It's a tool for managing the present and for dealing with a future that's uncertain. The story of the Megalakes has lessons for conservation now, especially in the places most at risk. Take the Sahel, that fragile strip of land just south of the Sahara. It's on the front line of climate change today, but it was also a refuge back then. When the Green Sahara collapsed, species and people moved south into places like that. Conservation biologists have this idea. They study those past refugia, the places that stayed habitable during ancient dry periods. The logic is strong. Areas that were safe havens in the past probably have something about them, certain soils, groundwater, microclimates, that makes them more resilient. If you can find those historical refugia on a map, you can find modern biodiversity hotspots. The places most worth protecting and connecting. It's a strategy that comes from deep time. Instead of spreading efforts thin, you focus on the landscapes that have already proven over thousands of years that they can sustain life through hard times. That's paleoecology in action, using the past to guide how you protect the future. Then there's the water under the sand. Managing the fossil aquifers like the Nubian system is one of the biggest challenges we have. That water is a non-renewable heirloom. Using it for farms or cities is like spending the capital from a savings account that can never be refilled. International cooperation is an absolute necessity. This water resource doesn't care about modern borders. It sits under several countries. Sustainable management means sharing data, agreeing on extraction limits, and working together on other water sources. It's a test of whether we can look after a finite gift from a lost climate, or whether we'll use it up in just a few generations. The lesson from the Megalakes is clear. Water security isn't guaranteed, and the choices we make now will echo for centuries. This paleo legacy isn't just ecological or about water, it's also cultural. The archaeological sites, the rock art galleries, they're under constant threat, from erosion, sure, but more from looting and vandalism. These aren't just tourist spots. They're archives, the only first-hand accounts from the people of the Green Sahara. Protecting them is an act of preserving memory. It makes sure the swimmer painted on the wall, the careful burial at Gobero, keep telling their story. They're touchstones to a human past that's tied directly to environmental change. Losing them would be like tearing pages out of the only book that explains how we got here. In the end, the story of the vanished megalakes teaches three big lessons: resilience, fragility, interconnectedness. You see the resilience of life and human culture, adapting, retreating, finding ways to persist. You see the stunning fragility of a paradise, how a stable system can unravel through a chain of feedbacks. And you see the deep interconnectedness, how dust from a dried lakebed feeds a faraway rainforest, how fossil water from a past climate fuels modern cities. These aren't abstract historical ideas. They're the principles of environmental stewardship today. To care about those ancient lakes is to recognize that our present world is built on what they left behind, and that our future depends on learning the wisdom written in their silent, sandy shores. The orbital clock that built the Green Sahara is still running. It's still ticking. In about 10,000 years, the Milankovitch cycles will tilt the northern hemisphere again. That tilt strengthens the African summer monsoon. So the astronomical conditions for a Green Sahara will line up again, theoretically. Climate modelers have run simulations based just on these natural cycles. The results are clear. If Earth's climate were left alone, the models show the monsoon rains would march north again. The feedback loops, vegetation and rainfall, they could re-engage. The Sahara, in a very distant future, could turn green again. It's a possibility written in the stars, a reminder that this desert isn't permanent. It's a phase in a longer planetary rhythm. But that projection has a caveat, a monumental one. Our planet isn't running on natural cycles alone anymore. Human activity added a powerful new variable. The rapid increase of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. That human forcing is a wild card now, a massive perturbation. It makes simple extrapolations from the past deeply uncertain. The climate 10,000 years from now won't be set by orbital mechanics alone. It'll be the product of those natural rhythms layered with the changes we're making today. So would a warmer, high CO2 world amplify the monsoon's return, or disrupt its ancient patterns entirely? Climate scientists say current models can't give a confident answer yet. The future of the Sahara is now entangled with the future we choose to create. That uncertainty has sparked a bold line of thought, controversial. If natural cycles might green the Sahara one day, could human ingenuity accelerate it? Some large-scale geoengineering proposals have floated that idea. Concepts include installing vast solar farms across the desert to generate clean energy, but also to alter the surface reflectivity. Maybe encourage cloud formation. Other, more direct proposals imagine massive desalination and irrigation projects, planting drought-resistant vegetation to kickstart those same positive feedback loops that sustained the ancient savanna. On paper, the vision is staggering, a human-led reversal of desertification, creating a new engine for rainfall and life. The practical and ethical challenges are equally staggering, though. The scale is almost beyond comprehension. It would require international cooperation and resources on a level never seen. And more critically, the Sahara's current state isn't an empty void. It's a functioning ecosystem, home to resilient life and cultures adapted over millennia. It plays a crucial role in the global climate. It's the source of dust that fertilizes oceans and rainforests. Trying to fix the Sahara without understanding these interconnections could trigger unintended consequences across the planet. Whose vision of a Green Sahara would we pursue? And who would have the right to decide? The ethical questions are as deep as the aquifers beneath the sand. Pondering a future Green Sahara, natural or engineered, ties the deep past to the distant horizon. It frames our present as a pivotal point in a much longer story. We're in an age where human influence has become a geological force, capable of altering the very cycles that once dictated the fate of continents. The vanished megalakes remind us that change is the one true constant of our planet, but they also ask us a question about responsibility. As inheritors of this dynamic Earth, will we be passive observers of its next great transformation, or active participants in shaping its outcome? The answer will be written not in sediment, but in the choices we make long before that distant orbital summer arrives. The idea of a lost civilization under the desert sand has been around for more than 100 years. It started with adventure novels. H. Rider Haggard wrote about forgotten kingdoms in Africa. Pure fantasy, but it touched on a real mystery. Now we have the scientific discovery of the Green Sahara. That mystery has a new shape. It's not a fiction anymore. It's become a cultural symbol. It stands for three things: a vanished paradise, a warning about climate, and proof that humans can adapt. Cultural critics see this as a backdrop for modern stories. In a time of environmental fear, a lush continent turning to dust isn't just history, it's a parable. It speaks to fears about collapse, the image of hippos swimming in pure desert. That's a visceral symbol, a world completely rewritten. So the Green Sahara is a setting for stories about ecological catastrophe. Documentaries use it. Novels use it, a real-world case study, a tipping point that changed human destiny. It moves climate change from abstract graphs into a landscape of loss. A tangible, almost mythical loss. Specific works tell this story. The documentary Africa's Great Civilizations spends time on the Green Sahara. It reconstructs the Megalakes, the cultures they supported. It frames this not as a primitive prelude, but as a foundational chapter. In literature, a novel like The Desert and the Drum. It's not directly about the paleoclimate, but its power comes from the Sahara's presence, a character shaped by that ancient drying. Even in popular science fiction, the concept appears. Stories of rediscovered advanced technology. They often place it in a Saharan past that was green, linking human achievement to a lost golden age. This story has particular resonance for Afrocentric studies. For scholars re-examining African history, the Green Sahara is crucial evidence. It challenges old ideas of a static continent. The evidence is there. Large settled communities, early pottery, complex pastoral societies around the Megalakes. This speaks to innovation, adaptation. It shows advanced social organization flourished in the heart of the desert. Long before external contact, this isn't about a single super civilization. It's about understanding the diversity of ancient African societies, societies that rose and fell with their environment. So the journey of the Green Sahara, from geological fact to cultural touchstone, it shows how science and story mix. The data from sediment cores and satellites gives us a skeleton. But our imagination puts flesh on the bones. We see our own hopes and fears in it. The lost paradise echoes a longing for harmony. The sudden drying mirrors our anxiety. The human migration out of the desert reflects our capacity to adapt. This story has left academia. It lives in our collective consciousness now. A powerful metaphor. It reminds us the ground has a memory, and that memory on a cave wall or in a novel shapes how we see our place in a world that is always inevitably changing. The desert we see now is just one moment, one frame in a much longer film, and that frame holds the whole story. Think of that first image, the sea of dunes, the emptiness. Now look again, you can see the ghost shorelines of Megachad cut by ancient waves. You can feel the humidity of a savanna where there's only dust now. You can hear a lakeside camp, someone mixing pigment to paint a hippo on a cave wall. All of that was set off by a wobble in Earth's orbit, a celestial nudge. It pulled the monsoon rains north, and that sparked a chain of life. It lasted 6,000 years. This isn't separate facts, not rocks here, animals there, people somewhere else. It's one story, where geology and climate and biology and human history are all woven together into one thing. Systems thinkers call it Earth system science. The planet works as a whole, a connected whole. You can't explain the Green Sahara with just sediment cores, or just fossil pollen, or just rock art. You need all of it. The orbital clock set the rhythm, the climate feedbacks built the stage, the lakes and savannas wrote the setting, and human ingenuity became a character in the plot. Adapting to each act, this story breaks down the walls between the sciences. It shows how a change in the planet's tilt leads to a painting on a wall. How a lake evaporating can fertilize a forest an ocean away. It's the grand, connected saga of the planet in motion. How pulling one thread shows you the whole fabric. The themes are cyclical change, adaptation, legacy. Change is the constant. The Sahara has been green before, many times, and if natural cycles ran their course, it would be green again. Far in the future, but within those big cycles, life adapts, animals moved, people made new tools, new social structures, new stories to carry the memory of water. Their legacy isn't just survival, it's transformation. They took the skills from the shores of vanishing lakes, and they helped seed the beginnings of settled life. Along the great rivers of Africa, the dust from that lost world still travels the globe, a silent testament. Nothing in this system is ever truly lost. It's repurposed, woven into new patterns, so next time you see a desert or a dust storm on the news or a vibrant rainforest, remember the links. That dust was a lake bed. That forest is fed by a memory. The ground under our feet isn't a passive stage. It's an active archive holding the layered story of a living planet. The vanished megalakes teach us that our world is a story of connections, written in water, stone, and time. We started on a sea of sand, and we end there. But it looks different now. We've walked the shores of inland seas that aren't there anymore, seas that defined a continent. We've felt the humidity of a savanna. Now it's just dust, and we've listened to the echoes of a culture, one that painted its world onto cave walls, a final testament before the waters faded. These vanished megalakes, the Green Sahara, they're not a geological footnote, they're a lesson, a monumental lesson, written in the Earth's own language. It's a lesson about the power of our planet's climate cycles, their awesome, rhythmic power, a tilt in the axis, a shift in an orbit. These are celestial whispers. And they can rewrite a continent, turn a desert into a paradise, and a paradise back into a desert. And every form of life gets swept along. The great herds retreated. Fish populations were stranded, and our own ancestors faced a choice that reshaped human history: adapt, migrate, or face a gathering hardship. This story connects the cosmic to the human, the deeply human. It shows us the ground beneath our feet. It's not a permanent stage, it's a fleeting scene. In an epic, ongoing performance, modern science gives us the tools to read this lost chapter. Satellites trace the outlines of lakes we can't see. Sediment cores pull timelines from the deep. Timelines of pollen and dust. They tell us what happened, and they tell us when. And in the silence that followed, the human spirit sought meaning. It wove the shock of loss into myth. It preserved the memory of abundance in breathtaking art. An environmental historian once said this: the Sahara reminds us, the environments we think are permanent. They're often fleeting stages in Earth's long story. That perspective is a gift. It lets us view our own rapid climatic changes, not as an isolated event, but within a deeper context, a more sobering context. It grants us humility, and it grants us urgency. This story empowers us with knowledge, the knowledge that change is the one true constant on our planet, but the scale of change matters, the speed of change matters profoundly.